All right, everybody. So this is a quick video. Well, it probably won't be quick, but this is on the v56 version of the firmware that I just released today for the SV06. Now, first off, if you're happy with your stock firmware, if you're happy with the previous version of either mine or Rory's, or you're running TH3D, you don't need to make this change. You don't have to run this. You know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, we always say. However, if you want to play with input shaping, this is one way to do it. You can also take TH3D's source and activate input shaping. That's up to you. Or you could take the source code that I put up for this and you could build your own version of this too. Now, when you do put this firmware in, no matter if you're using UBL version, the bilinear version, which is the one I usually use, or the manual mesh, if you update any of those three, because it has input shaping and that stores data in the EEProm, it will update or reset your EEProm. So you'll have to redo your steps, you'll have to redo your PID, whatever you have stored in memory that you're going to lose. Obviously, you're going to lose your bed leveling. You have to redo it. I always take my PID values and my E steps and I save those on my computer, and then whenever I put in a new ROM, I just go ahead and throw in the E steps and the PID values so I hit the ground running. This is my release version that you could download, but I have been running test versions of this, so it didn't reset the settings because I haven't changed anything, but you will lose your settings. So remember, if you've changed your homing, sensorless homing values, and that is basically in, if we go to configuration, you might want to make note of all your settings, but if you go to configuration, advanced, and we go down to the TMC drivers, and we go to sensorless homing, make note of those values if you've changed them. When you turn on your system at home, if the gantry doesn't go all the way over to the left and tap the side ever so slightly, if it stops too soon, you're going to want to change those TMC values to make them less sensitive, so you're going to want to lower them. If it slams into the side and grinds, you want to raise the number of X. Same thing for Y. But whatever you do change those to, save the settings so you'll have them. And just remember that when settings get reset, not only do you lose your E steps, your PID, you'll lose your sensorless homing defaults. Put all those back. So those are a couple of the things people see right off the bat, alongside of the fact that sometimes flashing firmware can be a pain. I recommend when you download the binary, just give it a short little simple name. Like, you don't have to rename it. I try to keep the names small, but basically just try to flash it. If it doesn't, you can rename it to something like, I always go with Simpson names, so call it bart.bin. The biggest key is it can't be the same file name as the previous version you've flashed. But if you have problems, try renaming it. If that doesn't help, reformat the SD card, try different SD cards. It will work. It just, sometimes the systems are problematic. All right, so let's assume that you've already downloaded it, you've flashed, you booted up. I'll just show you my auto home. So we'll go homing, auto home. You can see that was a light tap and a little light tap. You can even see a little shake from my shelf on that tap. Now we're back at center. And remember, the center is the sensor over center. So one of the first changes you might notice in this ROM is that I only do one slow probe now on bed leveling. The reason I did that change was previously I looked at the fast and slow because I've been trying to look into the issues that we all have with bed leveling, potential differences and just heartaches with that first layer. But I noticed when we did a leveling, it would do a fast probe and then it would do a slow probe, and it was always 0.04 difference between the two. I switched it to 2 slow probes and I got the same value both times. So I went ahead and just switched it to 1 slow probe because it seems like that is the accurate number. When it was doing a fast and slow, even though it was only 0.04 difference, it would take the halfway point in between and make that the setting. So Probably not a big major change, but I only went to the one slow, so it actually speeds up the homing process. All right, so that's a change there. Obviously the input shaping, I linked in the, I think the release page on the GitHub and on the post on the forums where you can watch Teaching Text video that shows how to set up input shaping. He went through all of that. If you want to recompile input shaping yourself, you can use my source, you can use someone else's source. If you don't really care about the whole building process and you just want to use the firmware, you can use it, and then you can jump in his video to when he starts actually calibrating. But if we go into configuration and we go down, or I'm sorry, go to advanced, and then we just go here, we have input shaping. So you can see there's an option to disable it on X. There's some defaults for X, and there's a disable on Y, and then there's defaults for Y. If you're not going to use the input shaping, but you need to run this ROM or you want to run the newer ROM, make sure you do a disable on X and a disable on Y and save the settings. The reason I say that is I don't really know if it'll affect normal printing if you don't have your input shaping calibrated. And if I set those values to 0 in the code, it would generate a bunch of compile errors because it didn't like the 0 values. But 0 is what you set it to disable it. But I would just use under, again, configure, advanced, input shaping. I would just disable X and Y initially. And then when you run through Teaching Text video, it'll let you then figure out what to put for the X frequency and the Y frequency. So, and that's too much to get into for this video. So one of the other things I added, just to try to figure out what's going on with the bed leveling, I added some debug features. So if you have the ability to have like a Raspberry Pi or your computer plugged into the printer and you're having issues with bed leveling and stuff, you can send me a PM on Facebook and I can tell you some commands that you can enter that then you can run. That'll help generate a bunch of data that you can look at yourself, you can send to me, and maybe we can look at the stuff and try to figure out some of the issues together. If you are using the manual mesh version, one thing that I've never been able to get, which would be ideal, is for somebody who has a problem unit that nothing works except the manual mesh. If you could run bilinear, let it generate the mesh of the bed. You don't have to worry about the X twist, but just run a standard bilinear mesh and using your computer, record the data, and I can tell you how to get the numbers, and then do a manual mesh and give me that data, you know, using the manual mesh binary. That would be interesting to be able to look and see what we're seeing differences. So anyway, when it comes to tramming the bed, you saw Rory did a video where he put a new board in the 06. It replaced the motherboard with I think it was a SKR board, I forget which one, and he had the ability to do that tramming automatically because it has individual stepper control, whereas with our units with the stock board, both Z motors run concurrently with the same signal. But with his board, he has multiple drivers where he can hit each one and it can actually raise or lower each side. So I wanted to add a feature to give us that, and I've had the Tramming Wizard in there before, but if you go to Motion and you go to Tramming Wizard, it's going to home, and it'll home regardless every time you go into it, and it's actually a good thing that it does that. And I'll explain what happens here in a second. So we're going to get our home, and normally the Tramming Wizard has a left corner, right corner, back right, back left, but I also added a left middle and a right middle. So I kind of skewed mine a little bit off. So what we're going to do on this is we're going to go to the mid right, which should be over here. The first time you do a measurement going into this, I said mid right and pointed left. Guess it doesn't really matter. But whichever point you go to first, that's considered 0. So you can see how it says last value 0. So that's considered your 0 point. Now if we go mid left and we measure it, it's going to tell us what the difference is on the Z between these 2 points. So it's saying that the left side is 0.15 higher than the right. So what you can do is then go ahead and click Done, and then scroll down and say done. And then scroll down on this next screen that you come back to disable steppers. And then what I like to do is I hold the left stepper coupler, and then I take the right one. It's kind of hard to do with this camera's in the way. And I kind of rotate it. So we want this one to go up, the right side to go up. So I'm going to turn it a little bit. And then I'm going to go ahead and go back to the motion. And I'm going to go back to the Tramming Wizard. It's going to home. So we got to go through that again. But we've, in a sense, we manually turned it. You've got to disable the steppers because you can't turn them when they're active. And if you try to, you could damage it if you're putting the old G.I. Joe Kung Fu grip on them. All right, so we're going to try to do it the way I wanted to originally, which was we're going to do mid-left first. Because again, whatever point you do first, that becomes 0. And I've set these 4 or these 6 points to be exactly where they would be measured for the bilinear mesh also. Okay, so then we have our 0 point. Now we'll go to mid-right and we'll measure. Now I turned it some. You got to get used to how much your turning affects the distance, but we'll see how good I did in a first attempt. So look at that. I hit it perfectly. So right now, the center left, center right are perfectly trammed. But don't get too excited. I mean, even with Rory's build, that's fine and dandy. But you're going to see here, if we do front left, so it's going to compare this middle point to the front left. You're going to see some differences here. Now, this is with a cold bed, too. So you can see it's -12 there. And then if we go to the back left, and we get that point, you can see it's -21. So the middle is higher for me than the back left is the deepest down. So no matter how you calibrate, if your bed's got this curvature to it, that's going to affect your tramming. So even with Rory's left and right being automatically centered, you can see that if I did it in the back, left and right, I could get it zeroed, but it wouldn't be zeroed here, wouldn't be zeroed here. So my thoughts are you probably want to look at how you could just run all these points, go like, you don't have to do any disable steppers, but go ahead and run all 6 points, make note of them, so you can kind of decide maybe what's the best of the 3 sets of either back, left, right, middle, left, right, front, left, right, which is the best one to go with. And then you could do your disable steppers and tweaking by hand. I like this method better than the soup cans and other methods because you don't have to have your calipers, you don't have to hook any special tool. You just got to make sure you disable steppers and then just hold one of the sides and then adjust the other one, the coupler, to be able to raise or lower it, whichever way you have to go. And then go ahead and do your Tramming Wizard again. That'll relock the steppers and rehome it. So one of the other things that I'm going to give some data on at the end of this video, and you can skip it, jump to it, whatever. I'll put time indexes on this video so you can jump around, is one of the things I've noticed is when I heat this bed up to 60 to do my bed leveling, if I keep running the bed leveling, it keeps changing. And then I'm going to say 30 minutes later or so, everything equalizes temperature-wise, and the numbers are very consistent. But I was seeing variations of like 0.19 from like, say, this point. I forget which of the 4, but like this point, from when it was just heated up to 60 to 30 minutes later, it rose 0.19, which is pretty much like a layer height, like a 0.2 layer height almost. The corners were all very 0.1 something raising over time. Even this left middle and the right middle were similar. They weren't as bad as the corners. And then more of the center points, they were more consistent from initial 60 on. So one of the things I would recommend if you're having trouble with first layer adhesion is go ahead and heat your bed to 60, let it sit for 30 minutes, do your bed leveling, store those settings, and then anytime you're getting ready to print something, preheat to 60 for a little while, like 30 minutes or so, then just go ahead and start your print. That way you're going to try to keep it close to that hot point. Now I have noticed when I took this PEI sheet off and I put a smooth one that I have for my 05 that I bought for the SV05, I did get better results. It's still over 30 minutes, it's still leveled out, but it was at least half as less amount of expansion or whatever it's caused, the heat's causing. So, and then it was really rock solid better when I let it get to 30 minutes of heating, and then I would go around and do the probe again and again and again. The values rarely changed, like 0.009, 0.008. There was very little variance. And there was very little variance even with this plate after 30 minutes, but it seemed like the smooth PEI sheet was a little bit more consistent, you know, from initial to even 30 minutes later. So something to check, something to be aware of, and to see if that helps you any. Some people have done the CR touches, BL touches, and different things, and found the same issues where they weren't getting good adhesion on the first layer. And the assumption is that the motherboard is what's causing it. And it might be. It could be a noisy power supply. You know, it could be the sensor itself. But the fact that a CR touch or BL touch was doing the same kind of data, I haven't done it myself, but others have said it seems to be similar bad mesh data. That would indicate that it's probably not the probe. It very well could be the main board. There could be some issue there. I'll mention an issue here in a second with the main board. The power supply, like I said, maybe it's a noisy power supply. Maybe some of the other motherboards that you can buy out there do a better job of filtering the noise. All right, so lastly, before I go and get into the leveling data and show it to you, one of the things that I've noticed with this board, it doesn't use an STM official part. You know, that's the processor. They use a Giga device, which is a clone. It's not a licensed clone. It's probably an issue where chip shortages caused people like Creality and Sovol to use it. Maybe it's a cost savings and that's why it's being used. It's not 100% compatible with the STM chips, and it's not officially supported. It may never be supported by Marlin because it's not a licensed product. So there's some legal issues potentially that Marlin doesn't want to deal with trying to support it, but it's not 100% compatible. But one of the things I've noticed, it's supposed to be a 512K processor. So it's supposed to be the equivalent of the STM 32103, I think RET6 or something like that. It's supposed to be kind of an equivalent of it. But one of the things that I've noticed is when your program grows larger than half of the program space, you start to see lots of issues. And it's not even really technically half of it. It's 256K would be half of it, but you have to take away 28K for the bootloader. So it's 256 minus 28K, which I think is 228K. So I always try to keep my binaries under 228 because I've noticed as soon as you go over, you start having issues. Sometimes it's just stability issues. I think once you get to a point where your code overflows into the next half, you start to have major crashes and TMC driver errors and just complete beeping. It won't run at all. If you just barely go over it, I think it's only pushing some of the variables into upper memory, the upper half of memory, some constant variables and things, so maybe you don't notice an issue. But if you keep everything under that 228K, it seems to work good. And the reason for that, I believe, is if you look at the data sheet for this Giga device, it says that the latter half of flash, the latter 256K, operates slower than the first half. So I think that is a problem. I'm not an expert at the STM chips, so I don't know for sure that they have that same limitation, but I don't believe they do. And I think that's what's causing issues is these Giga devices it doesn't work right if you have code and data, definitely code, in the upper 256. It might be okay for data, it might be inconsistent. So I've just tried to keep things under 228K to play it safe. And that's why it's gotten really tough with things like input shaping and UBL and X-Twist to put all that in the firmware for the UBL version. So the UBL version is slightly cut down. I had to take away, like, I think some temperature reporting features for like Octoprint and stuff that's really not needed. But I've had to take it out once I put input shaping in because there was just no room. So maybe others have discovered more about this 256 boundary and can look into it. But it definitely seems like an issue to me. But anyway, that's the firmware. Input shaping, tramming, some debugging features added. If you guys need it, let me know. I'll tell you how to turn them on. Nothing crazy. It's, you know, some of the default stuff you'll see the Marlin devs, they ask you to turn on if you're testing for them. And like I said, the Tramming Wizard. Those are the major things. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. Hopefully the input shaping works for you guys. Check out teaching text videos so you can learn how to calibrate it. And happy printing. And we're going to go talk about some of the bed leveling data that I have next.